19 years old, dressed in a captain's uniform, and within days hundreds were dead. April 12, 1945. Nazi Germany is collapsing, but in one prison camp in the North German district of Emsland, a deserter's deception unleashes a week of executions. He carried no written orders, only his voice, and a claim that Adolf Hitler himself had given him unlimited authority. His name was Willi Herold, and less than 2 years later he would face the guillotine. Willi Paul Herold was born on September 11, 1925, in Lunzenau, a small town in Saxony, Germany. His father was a roofer. Records show that at age 10, he joined the Deutsches Jungvolk, the branch of the Hitler Youth for boys aged 10 to 13. He was expelled for skipping drills and trying to form groups of his own. At 14, he re-entered the Hitler Youth, but discipline remained a problem. His teachers later described him as restless and unruly, the kind of boy who wanted command but not discipline. Even among the Hitler Youth, where obedience was prized, Herold seemed more interested in playing the leader than following rules. By 1940, he had left school and begun a 3-year apprenticeship as a chimney sweep. At 15, he attempted to run away with a friend, hoping to reach America. They were caught and returned by the Gestapo. He finished his training, and in 1943 was called into the Reich labor service. That autumn, on September 30th, he joined the Wehrmacht and trained as a paratrooper in the 1st Fallschirmjäger Division. In early 1944, Herold's division was sent to Italy, where the Allies tried to break through the German Gustav Line. At its center stood Monte Cassino, a steep hill topped by a Benedictine abbey. Believing the Germans were using it as an observation post, American bombers destroyed the monastery on February 15, 1944. In fact, it had been empty, but the ruins gave German paratroopers, including Herold's unit, a near-perfect fortress. Monte Cassino became one of the hardest fortresses in Europe. 4 major Allied assaults and weeks of brutal fighting followed. Polish troops eventually raised their flag over the ruins in May 1944, but only after more than 50,000 casualties had been suffered on both sides. For Herold, the battle left not triumph, but a chest wound that sent him home. By the summer of 1944, he was back in Lunzenau, wearing medals he claimed were for valor. Neighbors later said he strutted in uniform and ordered local Hitler Youth boys around like his own platoon. Some doubted he had earned all the decorations. He returned to duty, but by then the Reich was faltering on every front. Fast forward to March 1945, Germany was nearly defeated. The Allies were advancing through the Netherlands. Herold's unit, the 6th Parachute Division, retreated across the border. During that retreat, near Gronau, he became separated. Hungry and alone, he walked toward Bad Bentheim. On the roadside, he found an abandoned Wehrmacht car riddled with bullet holes. Inside was a captain's uniform of the Luftwaffe with decorations. He put it on. Later records suggest the car may have belonged to an officer killed in retreat, though no one ever proved the exact identity. What mattered was the effect. The uniform alone carried authority. Now dressed in the uniform, he claimed to be Captain Herold of the 6th Parachute Division, acting on a mission from Hitler. The disguise carried authority. Soldiers believed him. At a checkpoint in Ochtrup, a major even provided him with men. Soon, Herold commanded about 60 men, known later as Detachment Herold. The first test of his authority came only days later. On April 6th and 7th, he led men into fighting at Meppen, promising artillery support that did not exist. 60 of his men were killed under British tank fire. The survivors retreated, and Herold marched them north. At every step, he collected stragglers and deserters, and his band grew again. In the meantime, the penal camp system in Emsland was overflowing. Camp 2 at Aschendorfer Moor held more than 2,000 men in facilities built for 1,000. Most were deserters, some political prisoners or looters. Escapes were frequent, and the commandant requested authority to carry out executions. And in that moment, just as we mentioned at the start of this video, Herold arrived. claiming Hitler had personally given him unlimited powers. The Gestapo at Papenburg confirmed his assumed authority, and he began to act. Over the course of just 7 days, from April 12th to April 19th, 1945, Willi Herold presided over a killing operation at Aschendorfer Moor. Records from later investigations vary. Between 150 and 195 men were executed. Eyewitnesses testified that prisoners were marched out in groups, forced to dig pits, and then shot. In some cases, a 20mm anti-aircraft cannon, the Flak 30, was used. Some witnesses remembered that victims were told they were being moved to other camps, only to be led to their deaths. Others recalled hearing the sound of the flak gun echo across the moorland for hours at a time. British reports note that grenades were thrown into open graves to finish the dead and wounded. But this was no longer about enforcing discipline. It had become a theater of power. Survivors recalled that he stood by in captain's uniform, issuing orders, and that he recruited some prisoners into his band. Those men became his personal guards. On April 19th, a British air raid struck the area, setting parts of the camp ablaze and killing both guards and inmates. In the chaos, some prisoners escaped. Herold and his group abandoned the camp. After leaving the camp, Herold and his men carried their violence into the surrounding towns. On April 25th, in Leer, they hanged farmer Johann Blinker from a tree after he waved a white flag. On the same day, they shot 5 Dutch civilians who had come to secure the release of compatriots. In the countryside, they looted food and bicycles, drinking heavily and shooting at will. On April 28th, German military police, the Feldgendarmerie, arrested Herold in Aurich. He admitted his false identity, but Kriegsmarine Judicial Chief Horst Franke intervened and ordered his release. He returned to Wilhelmshaven and resumed chimney sweeping. Instead of lying low after the war, Herold's behavior once more exposed him. On May 23, 1945, British naval personnel arrested him for stealing a loaf of bread. At first, they knew nothing of his past, but survivors and villagers soon identified him. Reports piled up. Over the summer of 1945, British investigators compiled witness accounts of killings at Aschendorfer Moor and in surrounding towns. On February 1, 1946, Herold and other prisoners were forced to exhume the graves at Aschendorfer Moor. The British investigators wanted evidence, and survivors had told them where to dig. Under guard, Herold uncovered the very bodies of the men he had condemned. 195 corpses were recovered. British officers photographed the exhumation as legal evidence, and reports noted that some victims still wore fragments of their prison uniforms. The graves confirmed survivor testimony almost exactly, strengthening the prosecution's case. The exhumed bodies were later reburied in a war cemetery near Papenburg. Locals sometimes referred to it as the Herold Cemetery, not as an honor, but because it was Herold himself who was forced to dig up the bodies. The name became a grim reminder of the crimes uncovered there. In August 1946, a British military tribunal opened in Oldenburg under Colonel H.A. Bowen. 13 defendants were tried, including Herold. Survivors gave testimony. The indictment accused Herold of responsibility for at least 111 murders. During the proceedings, he remained calm. When asked why he ordered shootings, he replied that he could not really say, and added that neither he nor his men wanted to be sent back to the front. On August 29, 1946, 7 men, including Herold, were sentenced to death. 6 others were acquitted or given prison terms. On November 14, 1946, Willi Herold was executed at Wolfenbüttel prison in Lower Saxony. The prison, originally built in the 18th century, housed the main guillotine installation for northern Germany. Known as the Fallbeil, it had been used throughout the Nazi period. Witnesses recalled that prisoners were strapped to a wooden board, slid under the blade, and decapitated in seconds. Herold showed no visible emotion. He was 21 years old. Records note that his execution was carried out swiftly, in less than 30 seconds from the moment he was brought into the chamber. For the guards at Wolfenbüttel, it was another routine sentence in a long list of war criminals. The executions at Aschendorfer Moor became part of regional memory. In Papenburg, bodies were reinterred in a collective grave marked by a stone cross. Survivors testified to British war crimes investigators, and their accounts remain in archives. In later decades, the story faded from public awareness, overshadowed by other wartime trials. But it resurfaced through local histories in the 1980s and, in 2018, through the German film Der Hauptmann, The Captain, which dramatized Herold's imposture. Historians point to the case as evidence of how authority in the final days of the Reich could rest on nothing more than a uniform and a claim. One detail stands out. Theodore Pantchev, a British interrogator, wrote after questioning Herold that the killings seemed to him like a game of cowboys and Indians played with live ammunition. He noted that in those days many were unbalanced, but Herold stood out for treating life and death as play. Before we close, one reminder remains. Wolfenbüttel prison today houses a memorial. On its grounds stands a plaque listing those executed there between 1937 and 1947. Among the names is Willi Herold. His inclusion is not an honor. The plaque records every execution, whether of resistance fighters, deserters, or convicted war criminals. In Aschendorfer Moor, the camp is gone, but a cemetery nearby holds rows of crosses for the men shot in April 1945. The record is there in stone. A 19-year-old who found a uniform on a roadside, ordered mass executions, and was himself executed by guillotine 18 months later. That line of dates and places is the measure of his story. What do you make of it? Leave a thought in the comments.